Hello, magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Hello everyone. Welcome to our class. Again, this is SS031, Understanding the Self. And as we continue on with our lectures, today our discussion will be concentrating on the sexual self. Again, this is SS031, Understanding the Self. And today our discussion will be concentrating on the sexual self. Now, our sexuality is a part of who we are. We cannot deny the fact that we are sexual beings, whether we feel comfortable talking about our sexuality or not. It is an aspect of ourselves that we can properly learn about, and the better we can understand who we are and who we can become if we will be able to understand our own sexuality. I think some of you might feel awkward in discussing this stuff, but we have to understand that our human sexuality is a bigger part in understanding who ourselves are. So in this chapter, we will try to deal with sexuality from a whole new level, from an academic and a scientific perspective. And as we continue on with our discussion, let's look first at the learning outcomes that we would want to accomplish. The first one, we will try to demonstrate critical, analytical, and creative thinking. We will also appreciate the complexity of human condition. We will look at all these perspective. Also, we will be looking at this from these objectives. The first one, we will explain one's understanding of human sexuality. Also, we will try to integrate one's sexuality in understanding oneself and identity. Number three, we will identify the influences that affect the development of one's sexuality. And lastly, we will try to assess our own perspective on human sexuality. As I said a while ago, we will try to discuss sexuality from an academic and scientific perspective. Okay? So, para ho hindi maging awkward para sa ating lahat, we will look at this from an academic and scientific perspective, allowing our personal concepts of human sexuality to mesh with how the world and how the academy and how science would look like our sexuality. Okay, so we will try to deal with sexuality from an academic and scientific perspective relevant to understanding who we are so we may know better how to take care and protect ourselves and even those we love. Now, I would want for us to highlight the fact that we are learning human sexuality for the purpose, okay, of what? Taking care of ourselves. That's the first one. And the second one is to protect ourselves, and not only ourselves, but also those whom we love. Okay? And that is very important. Okay, Alver Nacho in one of these TED Talks talked about what teens really wanted to know about sex. And according to him, when we try to learn about human sexuality, it should be based on context. When he said, quote unquote, I'm all about context, because when we talk about sexuality, intimacy, relationships, and pleasure, it can't be done. They cannot be done in a vacuum. So, without further ado, let's now proceed with our definition on sexuality. Now, sexuality is commonly defined as the ways people experience and express themselves as human beings. Now, let me highlight these two words here. You see that sexuality is defined as the ways people experience. That's the first one. Okay, the other one is that when we talk about sexuality, it is defined as the way people express. So you talk about sexuality, it's all about our experience and our expression. Okay, however, the World Health Organization provides a working definition of sexuality when they said that when we talk about sexuality, it encompasses or specifies much more. According to them, when we speak of sexuality, it is a central aspects of being human throughout life. Okay, now, so when we talk about all these, according to at least the World Health Organization. So when we speak of sexuality, okay, it's not just the experiences, okay, that we see and experiences that we have, nor our own expression, but sexuality is a central aspect, okay, of being human throughout life. And it encompasses sex. We talk about gender identities and roles. We will be discussed also. It also speaks about sexual orientation. It also talks about eroticism. And when we talk about eroticism, this is where we get the word erotic. But the root, the where the word is coming from is actually from the Greek word eros. Okay, but the Greek word eros is actually it translated also as love. Okay, so when you talk about eros, you talk about erotic kind of love. So you talk about the romantic kind of love. So the World Health Organization also talked about sexuality as encompassing eroticism or romance, and also you talk about pleasure, and then you talk about intimacy, and then you also have the concept of reproduction. We will be discussing all of this today in our discussion. Okay, so sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, in fantasies, in desires, in beliefs, in values, in behavior, in practices, in roles and relationships. And while sexuality can include all of these dimensions, not all of them are always experienced or expressed. Okay, so you talk about some people deciding not to get married. Okay, so you talk about people who are asexuals and whatnot. Later on, we will be discussing more of those ideas. Okay, now our view about sexuality is actually heavily affected by education, by occupation, by income, by economics, by law, by politics, by history, media, society, culture, and relation. Again, let me repeat that. Our view about sexuality is heavily affected by education, occupation, income, economics, law, politics, history, media, society, culture, and religion. Now, how are we being affected by? How is our view of sexuality affected by education? Because definitely, people, if you are guided properly on sexual education, you will be properly educated about how to process what you are feeling about what you are experiencing at the moment. Okay, when you talk about occupation, okay, um, definitely affecting our view on sexuality. There are jobs, perhaps, that we know that are intended for men, and some jobs are intended for women, but actually, that's kind of sexist. Okay. But you have to understand as well that when you talk about occupations, you have to talk about body frames as well. Say, for example, if you wanted to be a mason or if you want to be a construction worker, definitely we will think of men doing that kind of job more than a woman, because the body frame of man suits or fits better, okay, in that kind of job. However, there are jobs, say for example, being the president of a particular country. Some would say that it's better for a man to be a president, but somehow that's actually degrading the intelligence of a woman, so that's kind of sexist as well. But then our view of sexuality can definitely be affected by the how we think of it, occupation, and vice versa. Also, our view about sexuality is also affected by our income. Okay, in Hollywood, there is this problem of gender pay gap, where there are two Hollywood actors who are both starring in a movie, but then again, the man, okay, was paid bigger or higher okay, than the women. So you talk about a gender pay gap issue. You talk about economics, just the same. You talk about law, okay, and when you make laws for men and women, you talk about politics. Like I said a while ago, we talk about history. And when we speak of history, most of our heroes are actually men, and there are less women heroes or heroines, okay, than heroes, if we may say. Also, that our exposure to media, our society, and definitely our culture, which we have discussed before, our culture definitely dictates the roles of men and women, okay, of both sexes in the society, and even our religion definitely affects our worldview, our perspective on human sexuality. Now, recognizing that numerous factors influence one's view about sexuality, okay, since we were young, explains a lot as we observe and make sense of the lives of people we know, the communities we have seen, and even the way we ourselves react or respond to various issues. Now, asking or admitting ignorance on the topic in the Philippine cultures is actually very much of a taboo or degrading. In fact, when you talk about human sexuality, it is very seldom in Filipino homes that human sexuality is discussed by parents to their children. Okay, this is evident, very much evident in the few data which are collected nationally on sexual health or sexual practices or behavior. But we have to understand, though, that this ignorance has to be addressed with proper education. Sex education may not have been implemented in our country, but this does not mean that learning cannot take place, because if more Filipinos would continue to learn, whether formally or informally, about proper sex education, then it may be indirectly passed on to young children like us, or the children that we might have in the future, okay, through teaching proper hygiene or through being discerning of a child's actions about sexuality, a child's reactions, a child's questions or comments about sex. Now, again, let me just emphasize that sex education, as we are doing it right now, is not to promote sexual intercourse, and that is definitely not the reason why we are discussing the sexual self, but we are studying the sexual self to promote good sexual health and safety from sexual violence. Let me repeat that. We are discussing the sexual self not to promote sexual intercourse, but first and foremost, to promote good sexual health and safety from sexual violence. Okay, we have to understand that withholding information about sex and sexuality will never keep our children safe, but it will only keep them from being ignorant. Okay? It will only make them ignorant. You know, we may have encountered the term sex and gender being used interchangeably, but for a better comprehension, for our own understanding, we have first to ascertain that these two terms are definitely different and that they are not synonymous. As we continue on, let's first define the concept of what sex is all about. Now, when we speak of sex, this refers to a person's characterization as female or male at birth. So when you talk about our sexuality, when we talk about sex, definitely if you are born with a penis, then you are considered male by birth. And if you were born with a vagina, then definitely your sex is female. So the female or the male genitalia, okay, gives us the idea of, okay, the sex of an individual, because the sex of an individual typically is based on the appearance of the external genitalia or other biological characteristics, say for example including chromosomes. Again, so the external genitalia of an individual dictates the sex of an individual. Whereas when we speak of gender, these refers to social characteristics that may or may not be aligned with a person's sex and adopted by an individual as their gender identity. Let me repeat that. When we define gender, these refers to social characteristics that may or may not be aligned with a person's sex and adopted by an individual as their identity. Okay, so if sex refers to the or is based on the appearance of external genitalia, when we speak of gender, this is very much of a social characteristic, and it is not dictated by the appearance of a genitalia, of an external genitalia, or biological characteristics, even of chromosomes. For us to better understand the concept of sex and gender, let's look first at this gender-bred person. Okay, let's look at the concept of a gender-bred person. So here you will see the gender-bred person, and here we will be discussing the concepts of identity, of orientation, of expression, and of sex. Okay, so again, as we look at the concept of the bred person, we will look at the concept of identity, of orientation, of sex, and of um, expression. Okay, so when we talk about gender identity, okay, this is either a person being a man or a woman or a queer. Now, when we speak of gender identity, we have to understand that this is referring to how a person in his head think about himself. Okay, so when we talk about how a person thinks about himself, it is definitely what um, it is definitely different from how the external genitalia expresses an individual. Okay, so if a person thinks that he or she is a man, then that is his gender identity. Okay, because it's all in the head. The identity or the gender identity of an individual is definitely what he thinks in his mind that he is. Okay, so it's the chemistry that composes you, the hormonal levels, and how you interpret, okay, how those hormones are actually affecting you and how you want yourself to be identified in your gender. Of course, there's also the concept of being a gender queer. Okay, when we talk about people who are gender queer, so this is relating to a person who does not subscribe to conventional gender distinctions but identifies with neither. So, a gender queer perhaps does not identify himself as a man or a woman, or perhaps this is a person who identifies himself as both a man and a woman, or a combination of male and female genders. Okay, so you have to look at the concept of gender identity from the perspective of how one thinks. Okay, before when we talk about human sexuality, particularly back in the days when societies were quite conservative or were very much conservative, if I may say, we only identify individuals as a man and a woman. We don't really discuss too much about sexuality or homosexuality or whatnot, but because our society have become more accepting, we have to understand how these people are expressing themselves or how these individuals are actually identifying themselves. Okay, again, when we talk about gender identity, this is how a person in his head think about himself. So if he thinks or a person thinks that she is a woman, then her gender identity is a woman. Okay, or his or her gender identity is a woman. Okay, so if a person thinks that he or she is a man, then her or his gender identity is a man. Okay, so it does not necessarily follow that when if you are born with a penis, then you identify yourself as a man. Okay, because there are some women who were born as a female but then again their gender identity is a man. So ito yung naririnig natin na women trapped in a man's body or whatnot. Okay, so that's an example of um, gender identity. Okay, if a person say is gender queer, then that person does not really subscribe to any gender distinction, so he does not really think of himself as a man or a woman, or perhaps he or she considers himself as both a man or a woman. Okay, so you talk about a gender queer community. Again, that is gender identity. How about gender orientation? Okay, when we talk about gender um, orientation or gender expression. Okay, so we're here already. Gender expression. So you talk about feminine, masculine, and androgynous. Okay, feminine, masculine, or androgynous. Okay, so gender expression is how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional, perhaps, gender roles through the ways people act, dress, behave, or interact. Okay, so people could be women are definitely considered as feminine. Okay, anong tawag dito, medyo finesse kumilos and whatnot. And when you talk about men, there are a lot of men who are actually subscribing to masculinity. Perhaps that's how the society dictated how men and women should act. Okay, again, because again, this is based on traditional gender roles. Okay, and whatnot. But we have to understand, very difficult, and it is not right for us to judge people on their context. Okay, we have to understand where people are coming from. Say, for example, they are coming from a particular community, and somehow the way they dress up is very feminine, but they are actually men and whatnot. Okay, I remember my brother-in-law saying that Korean men look like gays. Okay, perhaps that's how he sees them, but perhaps we can consider these people as metrosexual because somehow napakaputi nila. Okay, they take care of their skin too much and whatnot, but it doesn't necessarily follow that they are homosexuals. Okay, and whatnot. But also we have the concept of those who are in between feminine and masculine. So we call this as the androgynous people. Okay, so they are partly male and partly female in appearance, and they are of indeterminate sex. Perhaps they have both the characteristics of sexes. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, so androgynous people are those that have both male and female traits or something that is not clearly either masculine or feminine. Say, for example, the concept of a hermaphrodite is an example of an androgynous person. A hermaphrodite, okay, is an example of an androgynous person. Okay, so what is a hermaphrodite? Hermaphrodite is actually a person having both male and female sex organs or other sexual characteristics. I remember a couple of decades ago. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nancy Nabalta. Um, she was one uh, of the athletes who were very famous at that time. However, maraming nagreklamo nung nanalo siya sa may Southeast Asian Games ng gold medal because a lot of protests were actually given because sinasabi nila si Nancy Nabalta ay hindi babae, hindi siya ay isang lalaki. Later on, it was found out that Nancy Nabalta was actually a hermaphrodite. But you have to understand that it is not the fault of these people that they were born, okay, having both male and female sex organs. Sir, so papaano po yan kung meron silang both male and female organs? So how do they identify themselves? Do we consider them as a male or a female? Sometimes ang tinitingnan ng mga doktor, alin ba ang mas manifested na sexual organs? When we talk about naman gender identity, it all depends on what the person or the hermaphrodite would want to identify himself. If even though she or he has both a penis whether the person is both a penis or a vagina, the identity of the person is dependent on how he or she or how that person thinks of himself or herself to be. Okay, now let's talk about biological sex, and I think there's not so much of an explanation that I have to give here because we've explained this a while ago. So when we talk about biological sex, these is actually referring to the objectively measurable organs. So you talk about the external genitalia of an individual. So you talk about the hormones and the chromosomes. So for the female, you have the vagina and the ovaries, or the XX chromosomes. For the male, you have the penis, the testes, or the XY chromosomes. Okay, and when you talk about the intersex, okay, so you talk about intersex as a combination, having a combination of both. But when we talk about sexual orientation, okay, and this is very much important for us to understand. So when you talk about sexual orientation, okay, it could either be a heterosexual, a homosexual, or in the middle ground, you have those who consider themselves as bisexual. Okay, so when you talk about heterosexual, it's a linguaje natin, we consider these people as the straight kind of sexual individuals. Okay, so say for example, if you are a man and you like a woman, then you are considered as a heterosexual male. Okay, if you are a woman who likes men, then you are considered as a heterosexual female. Okay, if you are a man who likes a man, then you are considered a homosexual. Just the same that if you are women who likes women, then you are considered as a homosexual as well. But if you say, for example, are a man and you like a woman and a man at the same time, then you can be considered as a bisexual. You're in the middle ground. Okay, so I hope that clears out the air here in trying to understand the gender-bread person. Okay, and I hope that's actually something that we have already can consider as okay already. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, it's natural for everyone to become more sexually aware. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you are ready to have sex, particularly at your age right now. Okay, where there's a lot, perhaps a year or 2 or 3 years ago, you have experienced and you have seen a lot of changes in your physical features. Okay, as an individual, definitely it's very difficult if you do not have anyone to discuss or to talk about. Well, mas swerte kayo, you are blessed if you are able to discuss this stuff with your parents. Okay, because definitely they have a big role in helping their children to understand what's going on with their physical bodies. Okay, with their own sexuality as they turn from being a child, going to the puberty stages and going to early adulthood. Okay, if we may say now puberty, okay, could have been less stressful if we were properly oriented of what to expect physically and emotionally. Because again, when you go through the process of puberty, sometimes a lot of people do not really understand you, but we also forget that even those individuals who go through the process of puberty could not even understand what's going on in themselves. Okay, that's very important to understand. Now, just by reading a few books or academic books on sexuality, we would be comforted to know of how normal things and feelings we thought were or are abnormal during that time. Okay, so kung ano man yung naramdaman natin when we were on the stage of puberty, these are normal stuff that all individuals who go through the process or who have been through the process already have experienced, and that we are not alone, and that everybody or anybody experiencing puberty has undergone the same things that we have tried and pretended not to have come across. Okay, now it's natural again for everyone to become more sexually aware, especially during the puberty period, puberty stage. But then that does not necessarily follow that we are already ready to have sex just because we have become more sexually aware. Let's first define the concept of puberty. Now, this is the 1 to 3 year process of hormonal and physical change. Okay, let me repeat that. A 1 to 3 year process of hormonal and physical change that causes the young person to reach sexual maturity. Girls usually entering it about a year or two earlier than boys. That's the reason why perhaps when you were in your elementary years, mapapansin niyo yung mga classmate ninyong mga babae, biglang nagsilakihan. Okay? At parang nahuhuli yung mga lalaki because they entered the process of puberty earlier than men. But when you go to high school, makikita mo na bigla namang humahabol ang mga lalaki at nagiging mas malaki na sila. Okay? Kesa doon sa mga babae. Okay. Now, though expected to transpire, puberty is not a one size fits all experience. Okay. It could actually manifest in varying rates and specific ages. Say, for example, for women, part of the puberty stage is yung pagkakaroon nila ng menstrual cycle. Right? Yun. At hindi naman sabay-sabay sila sa pagkakaroon ng menstrual cycle. Okay, every individual develops and reacts in different ways in due to factors like, say, for example, stress, weight, nutrition, hormonal activity, and inherent characteristics. On your screen right now, you will see here, okay, the comparison between males and females who are going through the process of puberty. Now you will see here that women starts earlier on. Even some, there are those who go through the process of puberty even at the age of 8. But for males, okay, usually the earliest, okay, process was detected at around 10 years old. Okay, so you will see here the puberty spurts period. Okay, the things that women experience and even the things that men experience during that time. On average, the puberty growth spurt for starts at 9 and then peaks at 11 and a half. For boys, it starts at 11 and a half, it peaks at 13 and a half. And during that time, one sex characteristics also develops. Now, when we talk about secondary sex characteristics, these are traits that differ between the two sexes but are not part of the reproductive system. They include, say, for example, breasts in females and facial hairs, okay, in males. Okay, so you will see here yung mga secondary sex characteristics. So we're not actually referring to the reproductive system, but we are referring to the other manifestations, okay, of the process. Okay, so for girls, you have a budding breast, growth of pubic hair, growth spurt. You have the menarche or the first period, the growth of underarm hair, the change in body shape, and then adult breast size. For males, you have the growth of scrotum and testes, the lowering or the changing of the voice, the thinning of the penis, growing up pubic hair. You have the growth spurt as well, the change in body shape, and also the growth of underarm and um, facial hair. Okay, as the secondary sex characteristics manifests in the stage of puberty, there is also the concurrent development which is taking place in the brain. Okay, this is when the emotional region of the brain develops maturity ahead of the part controlling the rational thought. So when we talk about the emotional region, it is the amygdala, okay, this part, okay, that develops, okay, maturity ahead of the part controlling the rational thought. That's the reason why a lot or most, if not all, individuals who go through the process of puberty are becoming more sensitive and emotional because of their experiences. They decide and they become more emotional and irritable most of the time. Okay, instead of being rational. Okay, that's the reason. Okay, because there's also a corresponding thing that is going on in the brains of the emotions. Okay, which is the amygdala, the emotional region of the brain, which develops maturity ahead of the part controlling. Okay, the rational thought. Emotions tend to take over, okay, during this period, which makes the transition to adulthood and sexual maturity more challenging. Now, since most teenagers are not oriented, because we are not well educated on the drastic transformations, on the temporary emotional takeover. Okay, remember that it's only temporary. There's an emotional takeover during this period, but that is only temporary. Sentiments and anxieties are not communicated and handled well, which may be thought of by other people, particularly your family, if they are not aware, okay, or your friends or those who see you. They think that you are just being dramatic. They see this as just mere drama, or you're just being an attention seeker, or you are just rebelling. Okay, but in reality, this is a part of the temporary emotional takeover because of what is transpiring in your body, the hormones and whatnot that is taking place inside of you. Supposedly, simple things such as choosing, say, for example, for women, sanitary napkins, panty liners, braziers, shaving products, acne solutions for men and women, deodorants. Sometimes you're having a hard time choosing which to use and which not to use. Okay? Even seeking for help, asking questions, or just discussing with parents or elders about the changes encountered becomes an embarrassing ordeal because, again, the family does not really talk about it. Again, you are blessed if in the process of puberty you are able to discuss this with your parents. Okay? Ang malungkot kasi when you talk about the puberty stage and when you talk about sexual self, we somehow do not we somehow do not have the proper venue, the proper forum to discuss stuff. Because again, kapag sa family, it's such a taboo to talk about sexuality, about everything that you are thinking about, everything that has been taking or in your physical self. Okay? Doon sa mga nangyayari sa katawan mo, but then again, you go to your friends, but usually kapag naman sa mga magkakaibigan, lalo na sa mga lalaki, kapag pinag-uusapan na ito, libog na lang ang napag-uusapan. So, nagkakaroon ng problema in terms of the venue or the proper forum on which we try to understand what is going on in an individual during these processes. And that is the reason why we are trying to help us, all of us, understand the sexual self, okay, in this course, SS31, understanding the self. So you talk about mishandled stress, you talk about sadness, shame, low self esteem, unmet expectations from school, work, family, and peers. And this could somehow lead to depression. Again, we have to understand that depression, if not immediately addressed, could lead to graver problems, say, for example, like menstrual instability, or even knock-knock, magna-knock-knock po ako, suicide. Okay? And I have to hold back somehow dun sa pag-aaral ng mga bagay na ito. But again, people, um, please don't. Okay? We're here to help you out. Okay? Who loves you, and life is so beautiful. Talk it over with your parents, or if not, nandito po kami. We are here to help you out. Okay, if you are going through those period. Moreover, young men are more likely to be arrested, okay, than anyone else in society during this period. Statistics show that for most boys,
Criminal behavior begins, okay, around the age of 13, peaks at 17, and disappears in early adulthood. Okay, at least this is according to statistics. Okay, again, most teenagers not oriented on the drastic transformation and temporary emotional takeover. And this is resulting to serious troubles and problems. Okay? All adults, the truth is, all adults have gone through puberty, but then not all adults have gone through proper sex education. And I think that's the reason why we have the problem of overpopulation right now in the Philippines. It's because everybody has gone through puberty, but not everyone has go through proper sex education. Okay, that's one thing that we have to consider and we have to understand. As we proceed, we will now be considering our discussion on the erogenous zones. Okay, now being aware of the erogenous or sexually stimulating zones of both sexes seem to be interesting or perhaps very awkward when discussed in class. Okay, if we are in a face-to-face class right now, I bet many of you are going to be awkward discussing stuff like human sexuality and all that. But okay, this is relevant. Understanding the erogenous zones of individuals is very much relevant and beneficial, not only for sexual excitement, but also for protection against sexual violence. Now, when the erogenous uh, zones, okay, are touched, okay, when the erogenous zones are touched, there is an expected automatic sensation. However, the quality of the sensation depends on who and how the zones are being touched. Okay, now information again on erogenous zones are very much important because they are okay beneficial not only for sexual excitement, say for example if you are married or if you got a partner, but this is also important to protect yourselves from sexual violence because there are some people who have kind of know-how about these knowledge about these erogenous zones and you do not have, and they might what okay they might touch your erogenous zones and you might feel different because that's what they're trying to do, to arouse that sexual excitement in you, and that is already considered as sexual violence. Okay, again, let me say that when these erogenous zones are touched, there is an expected automatic sensation. However, the quality of the sensation always will depend on who's touching these zones and how these zones are being touched. Okay, now I went through the internet and looked at this figure. Okay, so these erogenous zones are also considered as the pleasure points or the 10 hot spots. Okay, on his and her body. Men and women rank the most arousing of each of their body parts on a scale of 1 to 10. So you will see here, ito po yung mga erogenous zones ng mga tao sa mga kalalakihan. Okay, you have the ears. Okay, okay. Kaya nga, di ba nakikiliti ka? Okay, so you have the mouth, the nape of the neck. Okay, the back of the neck, the nipples, the pubic hairline, the scrotum, the penis, the perineum, and then the inner thighs. Sa mga kababaihan naman po, ito yung mga erogenous zones. The ears, the mouth, the back of the neck, the nape of the neck, the breast, the nipples, the lower back. Okay, so ingat po sa mga taong humahawak niyan. Wag na wag kayong magpapahawak sa mga part na ito ng inyong katawan. So if you do not know, at least you know now. Okay, so this is very important for us, okay, to be aware, okay, when people are actually violating us already. Hindi lang po mga babae, kundi ang mga kalalakihan din naman. Okay, so this is very important. Now, erogenous zones are usually discussed in magazines, on the net, and casual conversations, mostly in relation to pleasurable sex by consenting adults. Unfortunately, okay, sex does not always happen when consent and it is not always pleasurable, safe, and healthy, particularly if you are being violated as a man or as a woman. Okay? Now, though far from being a pleasant topic, we all need to be aware as well of the importance of how to take care of ourselves, ourselves, our loved ones, and the young children from the reality. Okay? From the reality that we are still working on. And what is that reality? We are working on eradicating sexual violence. Okay? We all need to be aware of the importance of how to take care of ourselves to protect ourselves and our so that we can eradicate sexual violence. So how we do we define sexual violence? Now, sexual violence is defined by the World Health Organization as any sexual act. Okay? It's any sexual act. Look at these words. Attempt to obtain a sexual act. Even an attempt to obtain a sexual act is considered sexual violence already. Okay? Unwanted sexual comments. Okay? Halimbawa, may isang babaeng naglalakad at sinabihang, laki naman ng boobs mo. That is already sexual violence because that's an unwanted sexual comment. Okay? That's an unwanted sexual comment or an advance. Or acts to traffic. You talk about the problem of human trafficking these days or otherwise directed against a person's sexuality using coercion. When we speak of coercion, you are being forced to do something that you do not like by any person, kahit na sinong tao, regardless of their relationship to the victim, even if it is the person who is a stranger or even inside the family. Because here again, sexual violence could happen or could be done by a person regardless of their relationship to the victim in any setting. When we say in any setting, it could happen at home. Sadly, it could happen at home. Okay, it could also happen in school. It could happen in public spaces. Okay? It could happen everywhere, anywhere, including but not limited to home and at work. Now, these are the forms and context of sexual violence happening around the world as listed by the World Health Organization. So these are the forms of sexual violence. So you talk about rape, okay? It could happen even inside of marriage when that is not consensual, that is considered as by strangers or even during a war or even during an armed conflict. Okay. Also, another form of sexual violence. Okay, an unwanted sexual advance or sexual harassment, including demanding sex in return for favors. Okay, hihingi ka ng pabor. Okay, sa ilang mga eskwelahan, minsan mga nangyayari, di ba, may nababalitaan kayo na maiisang estudyante na makikiusap sa isang guro na, sir, baka ako may pwedeng gawing paraan. Tapos ang sasabihin ng teacher, baka, sige, punta ka sa bahay ko. Kapag ganun na ang nangyari, that's already questionable. Okay, never say yes to those. Okay, demanding sex in return for favors, you know where it's gonna lead anyway. Also, you talk about sexual abuse of mentally or physically disabled people. Para namang sobrang hayop na ito. Okay, when there's already sexual violence being committed to mentally and physically challenged people. Okay? I think that's the worst kind of sexual violence. Kawawa naman yung mga taong challenged and disabled. And then, you also have sexual abuse or molestation of children. Okay, sadly. Okay, so you talk about pedophilia and whatnot. Also, you talk about forced marriage or cohabitation, including the marriage of children. But we have to consider also the context of the society. Say, for example, in countries where teenagers are already forced to marry. Um, I'm not sure, but there has to be an overarching rule on this one. But at the same time, we have to look at the context of people just the same. I'm not saying that it is right, but we have to understand what's happening in the society and help them to understand that what is happening is actually um, violating the rights of an individual. Okay? Para magkaunawaan. ng maigi. And also you have the denial of the right to use contraception or to adopt other measures to protect against sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, so the World Health Organization considers this as a form of sexual violence when you are denied the right to use contraception. Okay, because you are taking care of your body as well, and if you don't want to get pregnant, okay, in a Catholic society like ours, this is a matter of debate still. Okay, and then you have the concept of forced abortion. This is still happening even at this time. And also you talk about the concept of violence acts against the sexual integrity of women. Say, for example, female genital mutilation, something that is very much happening still in many African countries and whatnot. Okay, minumutilate, okay, or sinasara yung vagina ng kababaihan. Okay, they have different ways of mutilating the genitalia of women in those cultures, but they would say that they are doing it for the purpose of preserving the virginity of an individual. Okay, but that this is definitely a violation of human rights of women. And lastly, you talk about forced prostitution and trafficking of people for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Okay, even sa internet uh, problems na nangyayari ngayon, 'di ba? Yung mga uh, problema ng mga internet prostitution, okay, and whatnot. Okay, so these are things. Okay, now, it is appalling actually to note that our country is not exempted from victims of sexual violence. Okay, so here on your screen right now, you will see sex violence and perpetrators in the Philippines. This was back in 2016. 2016. So, approximately 1 in 4 children experience some form of sexual violence. The majority of incidents are reported to occur at home, sadly, in the community, and even during dating. Okay, so um, on first dates, please do not uh, go on a first date, particularly on a blind date, na nasa madilim na lugar kayo. Okay, there has to be people around you, particularly if you do not know the person, because you just have to be very careful. Okay, in this day and age, you really have to be careful. Okay, of your actions. Okay, let's continue. Children aged 13 to 17 experience the most sexual violence, including for sex. Younger boys in the 13 to 18 age group are at a higher risk of sexual violence in every setting: the home, school, workplace, community, and during dating. The main perpetrators are fathers, sadly, and family members, say, for example, brothers and cousins, neighbors, and dating partners. 7 in 10 perpetrators of sexual violence are males. But it doesn't necessarily mean women do not violate men. Okay? 7 in 10. So meaning merong tatlo na perpetrator ng sexual violence na babae. Because there are also some men who are being sexually violated just the same. Okay? So we have to look at it from that perspective just the same. Okay? According to Alex L., you are not a victim for sharing your story, in particular if you have gone through these experiences, horrible experiences before. Okay? You are a survivor setting the world on fire with your truth, and you never know who needs your light, your warmth, and your raging courage. Okay, let us continue studying this with an open mind, okay, and a courageous heart. This is not to scare us, but to equip us and empower us with knowledge and vigilance, and even the capability of protecting and helping others. Okay, so that is very important. Okay, in our own ways we can prevent sexual violence. Okay, how? We have to be aware, we have to be vigilant but not paranoid. Okay, we have to filter what ideas you expose yourself to, particularly pornography. Okay, you have to filter what ideas you expose to, because again, you become what you see, you become what you read.
Okay, and that's very important for us to understand. And of course, definitely, if you are already having troubles with this, okay, you have to talk to people who can actually help. Okay, and that is very important. In our own ways, again, we have to prevent sexual violence. Again, by being aware, by being vigilant, but not paranoid, and by filtering what ideas we expose ourselves to, and by talking to people who can help. And also, we have to educate others how they can protect themselves and have to increase our media literacy. Okay, these on your screen right now. Okay, these are some government concerned agencies, okay, where we can report, okay, sexual violence and whatnot. Okay, let's now proceed with our discussion on understanding human sexual responses. Now, our discussion on the sexual self is quite very exhaustive. Medyo matagal po ito. Okay, and I hope you bear with me, but I do hope that you're also learning. Okay, as we continue discussing our lesson on understanding human sexual response. Okay, now media, okay, show numerous concepts about sex, lust, and desire, which could explicitly or implicitly be embedded in advertisements, in magazines, in movies, in TV shows, in radio programs, and whatnot. Now, the portrayals on sex are left for the general public to process. Okay, so kapag ikaw ay nakapanood, say for example, ng TV series or pelikula that has its own sexual content, they do not really explain why they do it. You have to process it on your own. Now, if the audiences are not highly media literate, concepts of healthy safe sex, morality, and even love could be blurred and become double standard. That's the reason why sometimes we blur the concept of lust with love. We blur the concept of sex and love. Okay, and that's very much problematic. Now, according to Fisher, falling in love is stronger than the sex drive. Falling in love is stronger than the sex drive. This means that love is almost uncontrollable, but sex drive is definitely controllable. Okay, that is at least according to Fisher. Love is almost uncontrollable. You do not know whom you will fall in love with. But sex drive is definitely controllable. That's the reason why, di ba, yung ilang mga experts dito, they would always say na when you feel that there's too much gusto in your body, too much libido in your body, you need to have activities kung saan pwede mong ilipat yung nararamdaman mo. Say for example, may mga hobbies ka dapat siguro ba, biking or going to the gym, planting, exercising and whatnot. Okay, so kailangan po yon because again, sex drive is definitely controllable. Now, sex also at times called love making, giving premium to the act being based on and done out of love. Now, science, like it always does, tries to explain the thing we call love. Despite the many efforts, it admits that not being able to identify the exact reason why we fall in love with a specific person. However, it is able to give reasonable bases and glimpses of what happens inside our brain in the stages of love. It also gives us tips on how to keep the chemistry alive. According to Fisher, we are drawn to certain people not only for cultural reasons such as socioeconomics, intelligence, and values, but also for biological reasons, which is true. Again, we are biological beings, we are sexual beings. Furthermore, she asserted, okay, that there are what we call the three stages of romantic love as far as our brain chemicals are concerned. So these are the three stages of romantic love, at least according to Greenberg. And these are lust, attachment, and attraction. Lust, attachment, and attraction. So these are the
three stages of romantic love. And at this time, we will be discussing this one by one. Okay? In the figure, we see that hormones or chemicals are emitted and what effects are in each stage. And it also, in a way, differentiates lust from love. So, first one is the lust stage. Okay. So, sa lust stage, sa kababaihan, ang gumagana rito, okay, na chemical sa katawan natin is, sa mga babae ay estrogen. Okay, the other one para sa mga kalalakihan ay yung testosterone. Now, if you find yourself sweating more on the early stages of relationship, yung dopamine is to blame. After your body is pumped full of dopamine, you will then enter into the stage of lust. Lust is scientific. Okay, this is driven by the sex hormones testosterone and estrogen. Now, these sex hormones present in both males and females motivate individuals to find a mate, being the main hormones responsible for the sex drive. Okay, yung estrogen at testosterone. Indeed, experiments have shown that altering levels of these hormones has implications about sexual desires of individuals. Again, sa last stage, ang gumagana pong chemical sa katawan sa mga babae ay estrogen, sa kalalakihan naman ay testosterone. Okay? Then, the second stage is what we call as the attraction stage. Okay? Sa mga kababayan, you have the norepinephrine. And then, para sa mga kalalakihan, yung serotonin naman. Now, this part of the journey is fueled by dopamine still and norepinephrine combined with a decrease in serotonin levels. Okay? This is where the infatuation stage comes in, which is mainly driven by these chemicals coupled with a decrease in serotonin levels. Okay, these cocktail of chemicals causes increased alertness and arousal of the body when somebody is attracted to another, inducing a feel-good reward pathway associated with the person, increasing the desire to spend more time with them. Diba? Kaya pag meron kang girlfriend or boyfriend, okay, there's always that one thing to be with that person. Okay, so nandun ka sa may part na ito. Okay, at gumagana yung mga chemicals na ito sa katawan natin. And the last one is attachment. Okay, so you have the oxytocin and the vasopressin. Okay, oxytocin has been called as the love hormone. Okay, oxytocin is the love hormone or also considered as the cuddle chemical. So you can imagine what high levels of oxytocin does to your body. Okay, the levels of both hormones are increased in men and women following an orgasm, which can be explained why some people become attached after having sex. That's the reason why, if at all possible, diba, we discourage sex before marriage because once you do it, you will feel attached to that person and you will be looking for it more and more and more. Now, long-term attachment between two people involves the hormones oxytocin. Okay, now you have to understand that. Okay, so again, these are the three stages of romantic love. You have lust, attraction, and attachment. In the last stage, you have testosterone and estrogen working. In attraction, you have dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. In attachment, you have the oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin being called as the love hormone or the cuddle chemical. Okay. Now, to be able to maintain dopamine and oxytocin, couples need to keep trying something new together. Okay. Say, for example, ano ba, kain ng kain, movie watching, hobbies, traveling. And they also have to spend time with each other and feel each other's warmth through gentle touch, holding of hands, hugging, and whatnot. Okay. Now, according to Maslar in her TED Talk, the right time for a female to agree to have sex with her male partner is when he commits, which is never on the first date. Okay. When does a man commits? When does commitment happen? The proper commitment happens is when
the man gets married. So, at least according to Maslow, the right time for a female to agree to have sex with a male partner is after they get married because the man is already committed. Okay, so that is very important. Okay, surprisingly, these backs up the claim of most of our elders' advice for a better and long lasting relationship. What is even more surprising is that this is backed up by neuroscience. Okay? Once one decides to engage in sexual intimacy, there is a sexual response pattern that will occur. Now, when we speak of the sexual response pattern, this is the physical and emotional responses that one experiences during a sexual activity. Now, there are several models for sexual responses, okay? But at least for our purpose, we will be looking at the model of Masters and Johnson. So um, this is the sexual response cycle according to Masters and Johnson. Do you have first one, the excitement, where there is an arousal of the penis and the lubrication of the vagina? You have the erection, the plateau, which is the continuation and heightening of the arousal, and then the orgasm or the peak or intense pleasure that takes place during sex. And lastly is the resolution when the body returns to the normal state. Kaplan, okay, divides this into three. Okay, the desire, the excitement, and the orgasm. For masters, it's the excitement, the plateau, the orgasm, and the resolution. According to Kaplan, the desire to have sex is important in a sexual act. This is backed up by Wolfson, stating that desire and sexuality are practically inextricable. Whatever we desire is a summation or is a summary of what we have been exposed to or shown growing up. This is a reminder for us to be careful of what we continually expose ourselves into. As we now continue with our discussion on diversity of sexual orientation. We respect diversity because being able to respect diversity can help in effective ethical, relational, and professional communication. Now, we will always have our own personal stand, personal belief, and preferences, and it is just logical to expect others to have their own just the same. However, being able to respect diversity will help us, okay, in all of these. Now, sexual orientation refers to our sexual preferences towards males, females, or both, but most of us already have awareness of the existence of diverse sexual behaviors due to a person's sexual preference. We may not be able to fully understand, but we have to give respect. Not all of us will understand all the sexual orientations of individuals, but it is necessary that even though we do not understand all of these sexual orientations, we give respect to these people, whatever their sexual orientations might be. Now, gender identity, on the other hand, is one's concept of being male, female, or both, or neither, and is entirely determined by and not by nature. Or if I may say, it is entirely determined by our society, our socialization, and not our biological factors. Okay, so that is one thing that we have to understand. Okay, now let's look at these different gender identities. Okay, so you have sexual orientation. So you have these are the types of sexual orientation. You have homosexuality, being attracted to member of the same sex. You're a man attracted to a man, a woman attracted to a woman, then that is homosexuality. Okay, bisexuality, sexually attracted to people of both sexes. You are a man who's attracted to both men and women, or a woman both attracted to men and women. A heterosexual or a straight man or straight woman, you're sexually attracted to members of the opposite sex. There is also an orientation called pansexuality or omnisexuality. Pan is
and omni are prefixes which means all. Okay. Pan means all. So these are individuals who could be attracted to any sex or gender identity. Okay, a person who could be attracted to a man, or a person who could be attracted to a woman, or even a person who could be attracted to a homosexual, a bisexual, heterosexual, or whatnot. That is a pansexual. And there are those who consider themselves as asexual. These are people who are not sexually attracted to any sex or gender. Amongst these sexual orientations, somehow I'm kind of having troubles trying to understand asexuality because, again, we have all these chemicals working inside of our body. And again, we are created all not just as um, social beings, but we are also created as sexual beings. So I have to study more about people who are asexuals, but I have encountered people who consider themselves as asexuals. They are not attracted to any sex or gender. This is reality, by the way. Now, in the acronym LGBT, or the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, okay, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. LGB pertains to sexual orientation, but the T, or transgender, okay, or gender nonconforming, actually pertains to gender identity. Okay, so these are the types of gender identity. So you have cisgender. When we say some who do not identify as either male or female prefer the term genderqueer. Okay. Now, there are those who identify their gender as cisgender. This is popularly called as cis at this moment, CIS. This is a gender identity which is consistent with the sex they were assigned at birth. Okay. Meaning, if you are a man, you are a male because you were born with a penis, then your gender identity is consistent with what was assigned at birth to you. So you are considered as a cisgender. Okay, and then you have transgender. A transgender is a gender identity, okay, which does not match the sex that they were assigned at birth. Okay, iba ang kanilang uh, iniisip. Okay? So, when we talk about transgenders, these are people whose gender identity is different from the gender they were thought to be at birth. Trans is often used as shorthand for transgender. Okay? Um, how does transgender happen? People who have a gender identity does not match with their assigned sex. Okay, so nagkakaroon sila ng gender dysphoria. Okay, ayun po yung nangyayari dito. Hindi assigned pareho, but those people, there's also that gender identity which we call as a gender. So these are people who do not identify with any gender at all. But there are those, okay, who are also consider themselves as non-binary. These are people who do not identify strictly as a boy or a girl. They could identify as both or neither or as another gender in its entirety. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this guy. Okay, and transgender. Okay, sino po ito? Okay? Siya po yung tatay ni Kim Kardashian. Okay? Sino siya? No, no, no. Okay, hindi po siya ang tatay ni Kim Kardashian. Okay. Sino po ito? Kung kilala ho natin siya. Okay. This is Kris Jenner's husband. Okay, si Kris Jenner po ay asawa ni nanay, okay, ng mga Kardashians. Okay? Ito po ang kanyang dating asawa na ngayon ay kilala na natin na si uh, Caitlyn Jenner. Okay? Pero si Caitlyn Jenner po ay dating Olympian. Okay? So naging magkaiba na po sila. Okay?
gender identity. Now, a transgender is different from a transsexual. A transsexual is one who transitions from one sex to another through undergoing several surgical procedure. Okay, so that's the difference between a transgender and a transsexual. Okay, that is very important. Okay, for us to at least um, understand. Okay? Though we may have experience having feelings towards or fantasies about people of the same sex, it doesn't mean you are gay or bisexual. It can be part of emerging sexual awareness. Okay? Sexual orientation, sexual behavior, and gender identity are independent concepts. All could be fluid or changing. Pwedeng magbago. Katulad po nung nasa screen natin ngayon. We may have the freedom to choose to whom we engage sex with and with how many, but remember this, if we are not careful and discerning, we cannot and will never be able to choose or limit the number of unpleasant, irreversible long term consequences it can bring to our lives, to people who matter to us, and even to the society that we are a part of. Okay? Now, we will be proceeding with our discussion on sexually transmitted um, infections. Now, engaging in sexual contact, okay? Engaging in sexual contact, either vaginal or oral or anal, can give temporary intense pleasure. Okay? Medyo marawak po yung ating pinag-aaralan dito sa may sexual self because we will be discussing about STIs or sexually transmitted infections and risky sexual behaviors just the same. Okay? It can give, engaging in sex could give momentary pleasure. But with it, just the same, is the possibility of transmitting more than 30 different bacteria, viruses, and parasites, or what we call as STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, that may result to a lifetime of sexually transmitted infections. So, yun po yung importanteng maintindihan natin. These are some of the risky sexual behaviors that we should defer ourselves from doing. First one is having more than one sexual partner. Okay, that's very risky. The second one is changing sexual partners frequently, every week iba-iba, or monthly iba-iba, delikado po yun. Another one is having oral, vaginal, or anal sexual contact without a condom. Okay, kasi ang daming germs doon. And also using unreliable methods of birth control or using birth control inconsistently. Okay? Importante po nating maintindihan po ito. And then, we also have one of the effects of risky sexual behaviors is teen pregnancy, because it's a term used when an underage girl becomes pregnant, usually referring to girls from 13 to 17 years old. Around the world, adolescent pregnancies are more likely to occur in marginalized communities, commonly driven by poverty and lack of education and employment opportunities. So if you were seeing your screen right now, at least in Southeast Asia, okay, the Philippines has the largest, okay, cases of teenage pregnancy, at least according to the study conducted back in 2018. Now, sexually transmitted infections, okay, or venereal disease, okay, threaten everyone who is actually sexually active. Prostitutes, drug users, and even promiscuous individuals are at a higher risk than others engaging in sexual contact. Okay, this is very important for us to understand. Okay, for us to protect ourselves and also the people we love, and also to educate ourselves. Just the same, STDs or STIs, as they are called right now, are easily spread through any person to person transfer of bodily fluids such as semen, okay, para sa mga kalalakihan, or vaginal secretion para sa mga babae, or even kapag nagkakaroon ng blood transfusion. Now, here on your screen right now are some symptoms and signs of what we call as STIs. Okay. Now there are two types of sexual transmissions. You have skin to skin, when an infected or infested skin has a contact with a susceptible skin. So there could be a possibility of transmission of STI or sexually transmitted infection. But also you talk about bodily fluid, where possibly
through blood, semen, um, vaginal fluids, and even breast milk. Okay, could enter the body through needle, open skin, or mucous membrane. Thus, it might result to um, sexually transmitted infection. Okay, if that is skin to skin transmission, these are the possible STIs transmitted: genital herpes, warts, syphilis, um, pubic lice, scabies. For um, what we call as body fluid transmission. Excuse me. These are the possible STIs: chlamydia, gonorrhea, HIV, and hepatitis A, B, and C. Okay, so we have to be very careful with all this. There's a lot of cases already, okay, in the Philippines. Back in 2017, at least, there are um, reported 9,264 HIV cases. And in 2016, 26 people are diagnosed each day, and 9 out of 10 are actually asymptomatic. So we have to be very careful, okay, in our decisions, in our actions, in engaging in such. The best way to do is to abstain, okay? And when we talk about abstinence, we try our best, okay, to at least make sure that the time and the moment that we do it is the moment that we are already committed to a person, okay, whose commitment is solely to ours as well, okay, and that's very important. As we continue on, we will be looking at our final discussion, which is on family planning. Now, the information on family planning and contraception is for everyone, even for those who are still in their adolescent years. Now, the family planning programs intend to provide accessible information on sexual and reproductive health for people to choose from depending on their needs and preferences. For in depth information and safe sexual health decisions, it's always best to consult with a medical expert, particularly if, excuse me, if you're already planning to get to have a family. Okay, misuse or abuse of the use of artificial contraception may lead to severe health risks. Okay, there are four basic principles of family planning. The first one is responsible parenthood. Okay, which means that each family has the right, but not only a right, but a duty to determine the desired amount of children they might have and when they might have them. I'm not sure how many you are in your nuclear family. Baka isang anak ka, or dalawa kayo, or tatlo kayo, or apat, or lima, or mas marami pa doon. Okay? But your parents has the right, okay, to determine the size of the family. But then again, it's also not only a right, but a duty just the same to make sure that the family that they will build is a family that they will be able to take care of. Okay, and that's very important. Proper upbringing and education of children so that they will grow to be upright, productive, and civic minded. The second principle of basic family planning is respect for life and our constitution. The current constitution we're using, which is the 1987 Philippine Constitution, states that the government protects the sanctity of life, and abortion is not a family planning method. We do not allow abortion in the country. However, the word abortion is not really stated in our constitution, but there is the equal protection of the child and the mother. However, in some countries, abortion is has been legalized in many countries, and in some territories just the same. The third basic principle of family planning is birth spacing, which refers to interval between pregnancies. Ideally, this happens 3 years after a child is born. It enables the women to recover their health and improve their potential to be more productive and to realize their personal aspirations and allow more time to care for children and their husband. And lastly, informed choice. This is to uphold and ensure the rights of couples to determine the number and spacing of their children according to their aspirations, and reminding couples the planning size of their families has a direct bearing on the quality of their children's and their own lives. Remember that to aid in family planning are a range of natural and artificial types of contraceptions to choose from. So you will see here on your screen right now some of the family planning methods na ginagamit, mga artificial family planning methods. Okay? But when you talk about natural family planning methods, ito lamang po yung mga tinatanggap ng simbahan. And when we talk about natural family planning methods, the first one is abstinence. Okay. The second one is the calendar method. Okay. And ayun lang po, actually. Okay. But when you talk about withdrawal, I think hindi rin siya ina-advise ng church. Okay. That's what I heard. I'm not sure. You know, as a Catholic, perhaps. Okay. If you are a Catholic, I think you know better. Okay, with regards to these. So these are some of the um, artificial family planning methods. You have the implants, you have the devices. Ito po yung nilalagay sa mga kababaihan. Okay, ito pong implant na ito, ang alam ko, either sa pigi or sa arms ng babae nilalagay. Itong IUD ay sa vagina ng babae. Okay, sa injectables, pills, patch rings, diaphragms. Kung mapapansin niyo, most of the effective family planning methods are actually yung mga babae ang tumatanggap. Okay? And then, you also have the male condoms, but hindi lang po ang mga lalakihan ng may condom. You also have the female condoms. Okay? Withdrawal, okay, and all of these. But you have to understand that condoms should always be used to reduce the risk of sexually transmitted infections. This is very, very, very important. Okay, topics and content about sex may be rampant, but it does not mean that people are well educated about it. Sobrang exhaustive ng ating pag-aaral of our discussion on the sexual self. But this is very important. And I do hope that at least no matter, even though awkward yung ating discussion on the sexual self, I do hope that you learned a lot about your sexuality, okay, as we end up our discussion on the sexual self. Abstinence, not engaging in any form of sex, is a natural method, is the most effective means of contraception since time immemorial. And this is very important. Again, let me repeat this one, and this is very important. Why we are studying human sexuality? Why are we studying sexual education? Why are we studying the sexual self? It is not to promote sexual intercourse, but foremost, first, we will promote good sexual health. And lastly, this is to promote safety from sexual violence. Again, sex education is not to promote sexual intercourse, but to promote, number one, good sexual health and safety from sexual violence. And that wraps up our discussion on the sexual self. We did enter already into the world of human sexuality. Thank you for joining me today. Still, this is S031, Understanding the Self, and I hope you learned a lot. Still, this is Sir E, your online lecturer, your class instructor for these course, saying thank you for joining. Until next time, God bless you all.